There are a few distressing and graphic details revealed in this episode. Viewer discretion is advised. Kaylee Muthart had been a straight-A student in Anderson, South Carolina. She was even in the National Honor Society. However, between working long hours to save up for a car and missing school because of a heart arrhythmia, her grades had begun to slip. So midway through 11th grade, she dropped out of school at the age 17. She thought taking time off from school would be better than tarnishing her academic record and would leave her with a better chance at securing a college scholarship to study marine biology, which she'd always wanted to do. By age 18, although she was working a part-time job, Kaylee was drinking alcohol and smoking weed often. While smoking pot with an acquaintance at his house, Kaylee got a strange and unfamiliar high. Later, she Googled the symptoms that surprised her the most: numb lips and feeling like she was on top of the world. Kaylee was a religious Christian, and the high she experienced made her feel particularly close to God. Based on her Google search, she believed the marijuana she'd smoked had been laced with either cocaine or meth, both of which are stimulants. She was alarmed, since she never perceived weed as a gateway drug. But here she was, being exposed to substances that she never wanted to be. Kaylee had always suspected that she was prone to addiction, since it ran in her family, so actively avoided what she considered more serious drugs. Because she had gotten the weed from the friend she smoked with, she felt like he'd betrayed her, so she left her job to distance herself from him. At this point, Kaylee didn't have a job, and her relationship with her boyfriend of 2 years began to deteriorate. To cope, she kept smoking weed and drinking alcohol and started taking Xanax recreationally. On the verge of their breakup, she had a mental breakdown. She was experiencing extreme ups and downs in her mood. When she felt happy, she felt extremely happy, and when she felt down, she felt deeply depressed. A few months later, in February 2017, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Although Kaylee had finally got answers to the frequent fluctuations in her mood and got a new job, having lost her boyfriend and a series of close friends, she was lonely and very unhappy. She remembered the way she felt on the laced weed and sought that kind of peace again. At the end of August 2017, with another acquaintance, Kaylee decided to smoke meth for the first time. She stayed up for nearly 3 days and experienced hallucinations she wasn't expecting. When she looked in the mirror, she thought she saw blackheads coming out of her face and spent an hour picking at her skin until she drew blood. When her roommate dropped her off for work that evening, she was too embarrassed by the open sores she now had on her face to go inside. Soon after, as a result of missing work that day, she lost her job. When she finally sobered up, she watched a video she'd filmed when she was high, and it freaked her out. The girl she saw, who kept talking and talking, seemed so different from the real her. After that, she steered clear of meth but still felt so depressed that she asked one of her roommates who dealt drugs for ecstasy. At the time, the substance seemed safer than cocaine or meth, since she knew people used it to feel more free when they partied. While on ecstasy, she studied the Bible, although she misinterpreted a lot of it. She eventually convinced herself that meth would bring her even closer to God. So after Thanksgiving, when she was feeling particularly lonely, she smoked meth with a friend. Within 2 months, she progressed to snorting it, then shooting it as often as she could, rather by herself or with friends. She had now also surrounded herself with heavy drug users. Although Kaylee tried to stop doing meth many times, she would always end up using it again. Her mom, Katie, realized she was struggling with mental health issues and drug abuse, so she tried to get her to go to rehab. But Kaylee wouldn't commit to going to a drug rehab or a psychiatric facility, and without proof that she was a danger to herself, she couldn't have her committed. Although Kaylee didn't even have a place to live, she'd been sleeping at different people's houses since moving out at 17. She convinced her mom that she had everything under control and cut contact with her altogether for a few months. However, on February 4th, 2018, Kaylee finally saw her mother again. She'd found a rehab facility for her daughter, and she agreed to go the following week. Unbeknownst to Kaylee, her mother had recorded their conversation, during which she said she didn't want to be in the world because it was too evil. the proof she felt she needed to get a court order and commit Kaylee to treatment. But the very next day, she bought meth from her drug dealer. She shot up that night and took the largest dose she'd ever used before. The next morning, Kaylee was still high and at this point had been awake for almost 48 hours. Although she was hallucinating, causing her memories to be a bit fuzzy based on what she remembers and details that have been pieced together from other witnesses, the following story is what happened to Kaylee Muthart on February 6, 2018. Thinking the friend she'd gotten high with had gone to church, she wandered there along a railroad track. Even though it was 10:30 in the morning, everything looked dark and gloomy apart from a light post, where she thought a white bird was perched. It was then she began thinking that someone had to sacrifice something important to right the world, and that person was her. She thought everything would end abruptly, and everyone would die if she didn't tear out her eyes immediately. She still doesn't know how she exactly came to that conclusion, but she felt it was, without a doubt, the right and rational thing to do. She got on her hands and knees, pounding the ground and praying, "Why me? Why do I have to do this?" She later realized this wasn't a personal religious calling. It was something anyone on drugs could have experienced. Next, a man she'd been staying with, who happened to have a biblical name, drove by and called out the window. "I locked up the house. Do you have the other key?" A sign, she thought, that her sacrifice is the key to saving the world. So she pushed her thumb, pointer, and middle finger into each eye. She gripped each eyeball, twisted, and pulled until each eye popped out of the socket. She recalled it feeling like a massive struggle, the hardest thing she ever had to do. Because she could no longer see, she didn't know if there was blood. But she knew the drugs numbed the pain. She was almost certain that she would have tried to claw right into her brain if a pastor hadn't heard her screaming, "I want to see the light." He ran over and found her holding her eyeballs in her hands. She had squished them, although they were somehow still attached to her head. The pastor immediately restrained her. Kaylee was praying aloud while 7 men, in addition to the pastor, were struggling to hold her down. She fought hard against their restraints before the paramedics arrived. Kaylee was so combative that they had to sedate her with ketamine. She was then transferred to a stretcher and airlifted via helicopter to Greenville Memorial Hospital in South Carolina. While all this was happening, Kaylee's mom was on her way to the courthouse with her recording to get her legally committed. Unfortunately, she was too late. At the hospital, doctors performed an emergency surgery to fully remove what was left of Kaylee's eyes in an attempt to preserve her optic nerves and to prevent infection. She woke up 2 days later. At that point, the sedatives and traces of recreational drugs were still in her system, but she remembered what happened. Everything was dark, and she knew she was blind, but when she sensed her mom by her side, she knew she would be okay. Kaylee was left with muscle filling the socket and a white spot, her optic nerve endings, where her eyeballs used to be. After a week, she was transferred to a psychiatric inpatient treatment facility where she began taking lithium, a mood stabilizer, plus Risperdal, an antipsychotic medication to manage her bipolar disorder. And through therapy, Kaylee learned to start accepting her new reality. In 2020, Kaylee received her first pair of prosthetics and graduated from a school for the blind. She stated in an interview that there are times when she gets really upset about her situation, particularly on nights when she can't fall asleep. But truthfully, she is happier now than she was before this tragic accident happened. She confidently stated that she'd rather be blind than dependent on drugs, and it took losing her sight to get back on the right path. I'd like to take a second to thank you for tuning into Horrific Nightmares. If you would like to support this channel, you can leave a comment below and hit the like button. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with anyone you know who may enjoy it as well. And if you already aren't, I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel so that you won't miss any of my upcoming episodes. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.